So thank you very, very much for keeping this going and keeping the space open for different voices, different positions, as we have here during this panel. So I think that everyone agrees. My colleagues who spoke previously said that. I will reinforce it. It's a very different time today than it was 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when BRICS firstly came together. The huge expectations of BRICS being a sort of an alternative or even a counter-hegemonic group or coalition against the US power, or the huge expectations on BRICS being able to bring a real alternative in terms of democratization of the world order. I think that it did happen to some extent. Of course, we have a much more plural and multipolar world now than in the beginning of the 1990s, by the end of the Soviet Union. I think that BRICS do play an important role, but the capacity of BRICS bringing a real alternative in terms of a more socially and more environmentally just world has been limited. And also BRICS has had a limited or a sort of reformist agenda in terms of the international financial architecture. But what is the main point to me is that now what changes, and it changed real quick, is that BRICS has been now increasingly a geopolitical alliance. This new characterization of BRICS is what we need to deal with now. So from a coalition of the global south, which had a more economic trade investment proposal, now BRICS has become increasingly a geopolitical alliance facing the so-called West, and we can discuss that. One first point that I want to make is that this issues and question of security is not particularly new. BRICS has had in the last 6 to 5 years increasingly security issues in its final declarations in every year's summit, from other issues such as cybersecurity, anti-terrorism, anti-drug traffic, even anti-corruption. It was important to Brazil under Temer, as Vijay said. So BRICS has had increasingly worries around security issues in the final declaration summits. But then we had in the last years, and particularly after Trump was in power in the US, this increasingly geopolitical position of containment of China in terms of its economic and technological rise. This has been a geopolitical issue for the BRICS. And now, of course, we have Russia's war in the Ukraine. And this war is a war of Russia, and I agree very much, and I thank Boris for his statement today, but it was an aggression of the Ukraine in the face of, and I think this is very important to notice, NATO's expansion. So to address a little bit Trevor's provocation at the beginning, we can talk and we need to talk about imperialism, but I do not agree with my friend and close friend and colleague Patrick when he says sub-imperialism is a general characterization of the BRICS. I don't agree with that because I don't think that fits in the case of China and Russia. I think that NATO was expanding much beyond the previous agreements. Of course, Russia reacted to that at the costs of the peoples, and that's very much right. So I think now what we live, besides the military war, is an economic, a moral, and ideological war against Russia. And I think this is very dangerous. It's not good for the peoples, for us in the global south, for us in the periphery, to live this moral and ideological war against Russia that we already had during the Cold War and in the aftermath of the end of the Soviet Union. So I think that the main question for us is, what is the people's take on this? What is the answer from the left, from socialists? What is the class character, as someone has already said, from all of this? And I want to make a point from how do you see the BRICS from each perspective, or how we look at the BRICS. So if you look from the BRICS from above, which means if we see nation states tensions with each other, nation states trying to accumulate or preserve military, economic, technological strength, technological power against each other, we do see BRICS in this perspective of a counter-hegemonic bloc facing the so-called West or Western expansions of Western imperialism. So BRICS is trying to accumulate material capabilities, military, economic, technological, to build its own power, particularly China and Russia, but also India, in the face of the US and Europe. This is one way of seeing the BRICS, and I have many colleagues here in Brazil, comrades on the left, who are defending a lot Russia from that perspective. This is a very classical geopolitical perspective. And unfortunately, we do have these distinctions among the left here in Brazil. But there's other ways to look at the BRICS. And I would say I look at the BRICS from the sides, which means like horizontally. I can see the asymmetries, the differences, the inequalities among the BRICS countries, the huge weight of China, the increasing weight of the military and technological weight of India and Russia too. So you see the asymmetries among the BRICS, and especially China's role in the case of South America and Brazil, of having this huge weight in terms of trade. Brazil is exporting only, particularly agribusiness raw materials and mining raw materials to China, whereas it's importing from China technological and manufacturing commodities. So China is kind of rebuilding this traditional international division of labor with us, and these sorts of things. And then if you look at the BRICS from below, that's our perspectives, we have two different ways for seeing it. One is the relations between BRICS and the other countries and regions of the global south. So BRICS in Africa, BRICS in Latin America, dealing with more poorer countries of our own regions. And this is very, very important, because we see BRICS not together with a coherent strategy towards Africa or Latin America, but acting individually. So we have a Chinese strategy towards Africa and Latin America, we have Russia's relations, historical ones, with African countries, with South American countries, India's relations with South American countries and African countries individually. So you have a bilateralization of these relations. And you have, of course, relations of exploitations of raw materials, of building roads and railways over communities and territories, of having these unequal trade relations individually with these countries and regions. And then you also have, in the perspectives of BRICS from below, the issue of social forces and class struggles and social struggles concerning major projects, the development mode of production that has increasingly environmental destructions, consequences, these consequences towards women's, indigenous, and Black populations in the territories, as we have this very clear here in Brazil and other countries of the global south. So I don't want to extend too much in this. Trevor, just to wrap up.
Yeah, because Ademar, okay. I'll have to cut into his time.
So I will wrap up and then I'll pass on to Ademar. Just to finalize my point. I think that's, I won't go into the years of the pandemic anymore, but if you come to this year, one important, very important issue, BRICS is it's a central space of articulation, coalition for Russia and for Brazil not to be isolated in the world order. I think this is very important to see. Last week's meeting was the first multilateral meeting where Putin could be without being, afraid of being constrained. Of course, he's not, but Putin has not been constrained. It's a space of non-isolation of Russia. So this is very important, and BRICS expansion towards Iran, Argentina, and others is more important than ever now in this situation. But I must also emphasize that BRICS has also become contradictorily a space of non-isolation for Brazil. So Brazil has not invested with Bolsonaro in BRICS at all. And now Brazil is also there in a multilateral space, trying to not be, completely insignificant and isolated as it is internationally. So to really wrap up, I think that BRICS could have played in the beginning of the war a historical role in trying to mediate and bringing both parties to peace negotiations. Of course, it could not and did not do this. So we need to think of and try to build from our sides as peoples and civil society a multipolar world. I think this is very important. This is right. But it needs to be also a socially and environmentally just multipolar world, and not, again, a capitalist multipolar world with this increasingly class and nature exploitation as we've been having.